On a warm May evening in 2014, a young man sat alone in his luxury BMW in Isla Vista, California, filming what would become a manifesto of modern day hate. If I can't have you, he said to the camera, speaking to the random woman that he believed had rejected him, he said, I will destroy you. And hours later, 6 people were dead. His name was Elliot Rodger, and in some of the darkest corners of the internet, he would become a saint. What seemed like an isolated act of misogynistic violence turned out to be the signal flare. In the years since, an online subculture calling itself Incels, short for involuntary celibate, has grown into something far more sinister than a group of lonely men venting online. It is now a global ideology built on grievance, entitlement, and in some cases, a thirst for revenge. It's inspired T attacks, fueled mass killings, and infiltrated digital communities in ways that law enforcement is only now beginning to understand. But this story is not just about Elliot Rodger. It's about the ideology that he left behind, the young men he seduced by his manifesto, and the digital landscape that has allowed their rage to metastasize. It's about that thin line between alienation and extremism, and how far society's failure to confront that line has left real people dead. But it's also about the modern fog of fear and speculation, where every violent crime involving a young male suspect is now run through an incel filter. The brutal stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students in 2022 and the man now accused of that crime reignited those fears. Was this another case of incel-fueled violence, or have we become so aware of the pattern that we see it even where it might not belong? But to answer that, we have to go deeper into the history, psychology, and the chilling legacy of a movement that turned sexual rejection into an ideology of hate. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cult, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post at least one deep dive every single Saturday on one of these topics, usually a cult deep dive or some type of really creepy ideology like incel ideology, and we break it down together. I also like to go live sometimes, so if you're interested in this sort of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. I'd absolutely love to have you here. I hope you guys are having a great day. I know this is a little woo-woo for some people, but Mercury is definitely in retrograde, and I am just so grateful that this video got posted because the technical difficulties this week were like, whoa. So, knock on wood, this video gets up. Now, as a lot of you guys know, I am featuring a teacher in each of my videos, and the way this works is I'm going to share their story and then drop their Amazon wishlist down in the pinned comment below, and if you have the means or are moved by their story, you get to click on that Amazon wishlist and provide them some of their classroom supplies. So let's meet today's teacher. Today's teacher is Tori. Tori works for Northeastern School District in Pennsylvania, and she is the restorative ISS, or in-school suspension teacher, at the district high school. She stumbled upon my Duggar video because I've watched similar videos regarding religious cults. Oh, and I felt like you did a great job covering the scandal. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll link that video here if you want to watch it. Well, she says I am 29 years old, about to turn 30 on July 22nd. Oh my gosh, happy birthday. This is like right before your birthday. That's amazing. This school year will mark my 6th year with the district. I started out as a teaching aide and grew to feel surrounded by the love and support of all my coworkers and students. events. I run our school's LGBT club and I coach our Special Olympics track team. This past school year, I switched positions from teaching aid to restorative ISS. You may be wondering, Tori, what the heck is restorative ISS? Well, it's a kind of new concept for our district, and I was hand selected for this role. It's a more therapeutic approach to in school suspension. I meet the student on their level and try to figure out the root of their behavior and work with them to make better choices. This involves a lot of one on one chats, fidget toys, coloring, puzzles, art, etc. I was approached to do this job because I work really hard to build rapport with students and I really look at everyone as humans experiencing human things. That's so beautiful. And it's more restorative instead of just punishing. And I feel like when people don't feel, especially younger people, don't feel supported, that is kind of when they start lashing out. And I think it's incredible that you are offering resources instead of just punishments to these kids. After getting 1 year of this role under my belt, I'm approaching this year with a more clear mindset of what worked and what I still need to be successful. I've made an effort to make my classroom environment as welcoming and soothing as possible because this helps me get a calm start to some tough work. Oh, I can imagine. I'm never one to look for a handout or help because, frankly, I'm usually the one helping others. But my salary is not ideal, and the budget allotted to my classroom needs was only around $50. That went towards a few sets of headphones. As I approach this school year, I have set aside some budgeting to get some new things for my classroom and plan to use any money I get from my birthday this year to fund my needs. But I'm also secretly going back to college virtually in the fall and haven't told anyone yet that I'm also budgeting for that. So, needless to say, I am a busy bee that is just trying to better myself and my space to better help my students. I was completely shocked at the beginning of your video when you said you sponsor teachers. I've never seen a YouTuber do that. Oh, and I was so impressed with the idea. Thank you for considering my cause, and I would love to answer any questions you have. Aw, thank you. She says she's AKA Mrs. A. So don't forget that that Amazon wish list is in the pinned comment down below. And since it's her birthday, please, even if you're like on the fence, just reconsider it a little bit. It sounds like she does some tough work, and I would love to give her just everything she needs for her classroom. And also, hopefully, maybe she doesn't have to spend all of her birthday money on work stuff. Thank you guys in advance if you end up supporting Tori. Now let's jump into this crazy video. Because the incel movement literally feels like it's a misogyny movement and it has a death toll. So, what even are incels? So, like I mentioned in the intro, the term incel is short for involuntarily celibate, describing individuals who are typically heterosexual men who lament about being unable to form romantic or sexual relationships with women. Ironically, the concept began in the 90s as a benign online support forum created by a female college student for lonely people of both genders. But over time, however, these communities were co opted by disenfranchised men who started to channel their frustrations into bitter misogyny. So today's incel forums bear little resemblance to the original support group. They've evolved into echo chambers of anger, self pity, and hate. So incels are not just lonely boys that are asking questions about how to approach women or trying to figure out how to groom themselves so maybe they're more attractive to women or developing ways to connect with women or developing their own selves and practicing self-love and taking better care of themselves in an effort to gain the confidence to start approaching women. Nope. Incels believe that society's norms have unfairly deprived them of the sex and affection that they feel entitled to because women should love them no matter what. If they're a man, all women should want them. In the lexicon of incel forums, attractive women are basically called Stacies, and they're viewed as vain and cruel for refusing the incels, while sexually successful men are Chads, and they're accused of monopolizing female attention. How dare you, Chad? It's funny because a lot of my straight women friends call annoying dudes Chad, so I'm just like, I think all the men just need to like listen to women a little bit. Maybe consider that women are human beings with preferences and opinions and standards. but I think that'd be a little too difficult for these incels to figure out. Anyways, these communiques. Sorry. I hope there's a community called a communique. These communities propagate the idea that genetics and women's liberation have created a hierarchy in which average men are doomed to remain unloved. So interesting that they find a way to make themselves victims within their own entitlement. Now, resentment starts to fester in extreme rhetoric like this because incels routinely blame women for their woes and often fantasize about revenge or violent correction. Quote, they call themselves incels, a rapidly proliferating online community of young men frustrated at their inability to find sexual partners, unquote. This is what one analysis described, noting that the incel ideology rails against Stacy's as well as Chad's in some very profoundly hostile terms. So, though it's difficult to pin down membership numbers, the subculture's online footprint has grown significantly over the past decade. Early hubs included forums like PUA Hate, a site for men who are angry at pickup artists. But after bans on hate speech, these incels regrouped on their own websites and fringe platforms like 8chan and 8kun, and private channels on apps like Telegram and Discord. Imagine being so not self aware that instead of spending time reflecting on yourself and trying to see if there are any things that you can improve upon, reading a book like How to Make Friends and Influence People, going to therapy, instead you spend all your time on Discord complaining that nobody wants to sleep with you. And it's not your fault they don't, it's their fault that they don't. By 2022, one major incel forum was reportedly gaining over 4,000 new members in a single year. And alongside this growth, the tone of incel discourse has radicalized. While many posts are self loathing or nihilistic, a strain of users explicitly glorify violence. Prominent mass killers who fit the incel profile are hailed as heroes or even saints in these circles, with their images and writings shared as inspiration. This toxic online subculture is part of the broader manosphere of misogynistic and male supremacist communities, and it's raised alarm because it doesn't just stop at angry internet chat. In a disturbing number of cases, incel ideology has spilled into the real world with deadly consequences. The modern incel movement's inflection point is widely traced to a single night of bloodshed in 2014. On May 23rd, 2014, a 22-year-old named Elliot Rodger carried out a violent rampage in Isla Vista, California that would leave 6 people dead and 14 other people injured. Now, in the hours before the massacre, Rodger emailed a 107,000-word manifesto titled My Twisted World to dozens of people, including his parents and therapist, and then uploaded a YouTube video in which he chillingly announced his motive. If I can't have you girls, I will destroy you, he said. So, this declaration of hatred, along with the manifesto's detailed grievances, laid out Rodger's rage at women and the world at large for what he perceived as years of romantic rejection. He described his impending attack as a day of retribution against women who spurned him and the men who enjoyed the pleasures that he felt unfairly denied. And it's so interesting because with these incels, it is like they will see people just existing, just being romantic, just living their life. Or they will see a beautiful woman, not know how to approach her, and instead of thinking, maybe I should figure out a way to do that, they literally take it almost as a personal attack that there is a beautiful woman in front of them and they can't have access to her. Or they will see a couple holding hands and think that that couple holding hands, their intention is to make the incel feel bad. They are so self-involved that they cannot comprehend that, oh, maybe literally no one knows who you are and they're just living their lives happily in the moment with their partner or loved one. Why does it bother you so much? And also, imagine being so self-involved that you write a frickin' manifesto and think that people will genuinely be interested in reading it. People are interested in reading it because they want to bring some type of logic to these terrible, terrible actions. But it just reminds me of like the grandma, grandpa who's super out of touch on Facebook, and without anyone asking for their opinion, they just write a long diatribe about something they hate or about a friend, and you're just like, what is this stream of, I can't even call it consciousness because it is so unhinged. Somebody put grandma to bed. Anyways, Roger's rampage began at his apartment where he murdered 3 men, 2 roommates, and a visitor with knives. He then drove to a nearby UC Santa Barbara sorority house, which is a building that he saw as filled with the kind of attractive women, or Stacy's, that he both desired but simultaneously despised. What? You realize that, like, if you want a woman to want to be around you, you need to, like, respect her, right? No? Is that concept just lost on these people? Now, he found out that the sorority door was locked. So instead, he opened fire outside and shot 3 women, 2 of whom died. He then drove through the streets of Isla Vista, firing randomly at pedestrians and striking people with his BMW before fatally shooting himself. In total, he killed 6 victims and wounded over a dozen more. All because he didn't know how to speak to women and thought that that was everybody else's fault. Now, what truly distinguishes this tragedy is how directly it fed into the incel narrative online. Roger's sprawling manifesto and videos were immediately seized upon by like-minded men in forums. In these dark corners of the internet, he was anointed as the incel's patron saint, or, listen to this, supreme gentleman. Gentleman for open firing on innocent women and couples. And he was hailed for fighting back against a society that they felt had marginalized them. Like, literally, you can't marginalize someone that you have no idea about. You can't marginalize someone if you have no clue who they are. You can't. Nobody knows who y'all are, and nobody cares because it makes us all uncomfortable. If you can't find a romantic connection, there's something going on with you, and it's your responsibility to figure it out. But his quotes and life story, however warped in his self-justifications, became these like sacred texts on incel websites. And nearly a decade later, Roger is still glorified in incel communities as a martyr of the cause, inspiring explicit imitators and cementing a violent mythology. In fact, the very screen name Saint Elliot, or references to going ER or going Elliot Rodger, have become shorthand for committing revenge against women. Quote, the Isla Vista shooter's violence continues to be celebrated, and he is glorified by his community as a saint and a hero, unquote. And this is what the Southern Poverty Law Center reports. Roger's own manifesto, a toxic stew of misogyny and even racist diatribes, remains easily accessible online, and it's disturbingly cited by subsequent mass attackers. And then other attackers are inspired to make their own manifestos. I think if you want to, like, it's kind of like that concept, like if you break up with somebody, you write an email but you don't send it, or if you have intrusive thoughts, you journal about it, but it's private and it's in your journal. If you want to write a manifesto and then bring it to your therapist or your parents or someone you can trust to try to determine why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. I think that sometimes when we are so self-involved and we're constantly playing the victim, which is a very important, it's very important to distinguish playing the victim and victimizing yourself versus an actual victim of a crime or violence. Those are 2 completely different things. But if you're going to put yourself in this place of victimhood constantly with no single perpetrator, but everyone is the perpetrator in your head, at some point, there needs to be a reflex where we ask ourselves, Could the problem be me? That's what true self awareness is, and it's different than being self involved. And this goes for honestly anyone, but if you are constantly blaming other people for the situations that you find yourself in, there's one common denominator, and that common denominator might be you. So I'm sure there are going to be incels that come across this video and they'll probably be angry with me and they will probably talk about how ugly and disgusting and how much of a Stacy I am and my hair is frizzy and I talk weird. It's never, stuff I've heard before. But those are ad hominem attacks that don't support you or your ideology at all, and they don't support your growth. So I would just ask if you do find yourself as maybe not even an incel, but someone that finds it easier to blame other people for situations that you find yourself in, I promise you, you will be so much happier and find so much more success, whether it's romantic or in your job or in your other types of relationships. If you have an honest conversation with yourself about how you might be contributing to the experience that only you are having, because nobody else, especially strangers, has any idea about you. They're indifferent about you. They don't know who you are. As much as that sucks to hear, the only person thinking about you as often as you is you. Even your friends, they are not thinking about you as much as you think they are. So reflect, guys. I didn't know this was going to be like an advice video for incels, but here we are. Now, in the years following that Isla Vista massacre, a series of attacks across North America and beyond have been linked to incel ideology, either through the perpetrator's explicit statements or posthumous investigations. Now, these incidents differ in specifics, but they share a common theme of violent misogyny and social alienation. Among the most notable is the Toronto van attack in 2018, when a 25-year-old self-identified incel, Alec Manassian, drove a rented van into pedestrians on a busy Toronto street and killed 10 people and then injured 16. Just before that massacre, he posted on Facebook that the incel rebellion has already begun and referenced Saint Elliot Rodger. A Canadian judge found that Manassian's attack was partly motivated by his intense resentment towards women, and it remains one of the deadliest incidents attributed to incel extremism. There's also the Tallahassee yoga studio shooting. In November of 2018, a 40-year-old Florida man walked into a woman's yoga class in Tallahassee and opened fire. He killed 2 women and wounded 6 other people before ending himself. He also had a history of harassing women and had posted YouTube videos railing against female students who ignored him. Investigators later discovered that he had authored a 70,000-word fantasy story about killing women. And in a note before the attack, he wrote, quote, "If I can't find one decent female, I will have no choice but to deny them life." The U.S. Secret Service studied this case and concluded that the shooter was driven by his inability to develop or maintain relationships with women and an overarching belief that women had power over him. And he did not like that. And it's just really interesting that higher up levels of government have been looking into these cases, especially because femicide isn't something that's like recognized as an identifiable crime here in the United States. A lot of other countries have something called femicide, which is a crime or a murder against a woman specifically. In America, we have the overarching homicide. And I think that it's really, really important to distinguish the two because women are at the highest risk of crimes happening to them. And I think that if we did have that distinguished, this is a femicide and the rate of femicide, we would have something more than just statistics to measure because it's even with friends that I try to talk about like being more safe or, you know, taking measures when they're out in public to protect themselves or even looking out for domestic issues. A lot of women specifically, even who I'm friends with, and I have an anti-cult channel, an anti-abuse channel, they will still not fully understand that they are at the highest risk of violence and most often they are killed or harmed by someone they know or in a relationship with. So I think it would be so important and valuable if the United States did start to recognize femicide federally. Maybe a few states recognize it, but I do think that like distinguishing that would be really, really important, especially if it was looped into coercive control. I mean, we see the example with the Diddy case and the absolute shocking verdict there, where these were crimes done upon women, and he was basically exonerated for the most intense crimes. And it just starts to feel like, wow, do people really not care about crimes against women? So I just wonder if we had that like distinguished label for it, it would be taken more seriously alongside coercive control. I know I just went on a rant, but it's something I'm really passionate about, and I think it's really important to talk about. There have also been mass shootings, including school shootings in recent years, that have cited incel type grievances alongside other motives. In 2015, a gunman who killed 9 people at Umpqua Community College in Oregon left writings expressing sexual frustration and envy of other men, sentiments that echo incel ideology. The 2018 high school shooter in Parkland, Florida, who killed 17, had made online comments, including praise for Elliot Rodger, though his pathology did involve many factors. But these cases illustrate how incel rhetoric can merge with broader violent impulses, and it blurs the line between personal rage and ideological extremism. Now, outside North America, incel ideology has also been implicated in crimes. In August 2021, a 22-year-old man in Plymouth, England, shot and killed 5 people, including a toddler and even himself. He had frequented incel forums and spewed hatred toward women online. British authorities stopped short of labeling it terrorism, but the case intensified debates in the UK about incels as a legit security threat, and they are. Anyone who says that these groups who are nurtured and created online are not true threats to humanity as a whole, to society, are actually kidding themselves. There are online cults. The place we get most of our information and develop most of our opinions at this point in time are created by people with influence. Those are influencers. Those are people online. Now, from 2014 onward, dozens of people have lost their lives to attacks linked to incel ideology. By one count in early 2021, incel inspired or incel adjacent violence had killed approximately 40 to 50 people in the US and Canada. The exact tally does vary by definition because some analyses include perpetrators who mentioned incel ideas in passing, but the core of clearly incel motivated murders is a little smaller. Now, in the years since that estimate, additional incidents such as the Plymouth shooting and others have sadly added to the death toll. In total, over 100 people have been killed or injured by self described incels or their acolytes in the past decade. This trajectory has led many experts to conclude that what might superficially look like loners lashing out is, in fact, a pattern of ideological violence, a form of extremism rooted in gender based hatred. Law enforcement and terrorism analysts have increasingly come to view the incel subculture as a real and rising threat. The violence associated with incels is ideological by nature. It targets a specific group, women or people perceived as sexually successful, and seeks to instill fear. Quote, incel violence is ideological violence against civilians to prove an ideology point or create psychological fear, unquote. And so this, by definition, makes it a form of terror. Incels aim to terrorize women into submission. And indeed, Elliot Rodger wrote in his manifesto that he wanted to make women fearful so that they would never reject men like him. As another analysis put it, incel forums exhibit all the standard components of extremist belief, including an in-group, incels, and out-group, women who are Stacys and men who are Chads. And by advocating bloodshed to intimidate those out-groups, incels fulfill the core definition of terrorism. But for years, this threat has been underestimated or misunderstood. Early media coverage of Rodger and his successors often painted them as mentally disturbed lone wolves rather than extremists driven by a shared hateful creed. That perception has been gradually shifting, though. In 2018, the Southern Poverty Law Center and other watchdog groups formally began tracking male supremacist ideologies, including incels, alongside other extremist movements. In 2019, researchers founded the Institute for Research on Male Supremacism to specifically study misogynistic extremism and advise policymakers. By 2020, government agencies were taking note. An intelligence threat assessment in Texas explicitly warned that incels were an emerging terrorist threat that needed to be recognized by law enforcement. And perhaps the biggest wake up call came from the United States Secret Service. In early 2022, the Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center released a report examining the Tallahassee yoga studio shooting as a case study in misogynistic extremism. The report flagged numerous red flags common in such attackers, from stalking and harassment of women to the consumption of violent online content, and urged greater awareness and early intervention. Hatred of women and the gender based violence that is associated with it requires increased attention from everyone as a role within public safety, unquote. This is literally what the Secret Service warned of. Now, notably, the report stopped short of using the word terror, but many in law enforcement increasingly use that terminology. In Canada, authorities have gone even further. After that deadly 2020 stabbing at a Toronto massage parlor by a teenager who identified with incels, Canadian prosecutors charged the act as terrorism under law, marking the first time incel violence was formally prosecuted as a terrorist activity. Now, there's ongoing debate about how to counter the incel threat. Some experts caution against overstating the danger or granting these killers a grand terrorist status that they seek. They note that many incel perpetrators have evident mental health struggles or social disorders, and suggest that viewing the issue as partly a public health or preventative mental health challenge. Indeed, depression, isolation, and histories of bullying are not uncommon among incel actors. It's a movement that is desperately sad, as one analyst told The Guardian. But importantly, the mental illness alone does not cause someone to write manifestos about subjugating women or to idolize prior killers. Researchers like Alex DeBranco argue that undue sympathy can cloud the fact that this is an ideology, not a psychological disorder. And I think it would behoove us all not to connect mental disorders or mental health challenges with incels, because people love to generalize. And I think that's the last thing people who are dealing with certain mental health issues, it's probably the last thing they need to be, grouped up with incels. So, however tragic their personal circumstances, violent incels consciously embrace a set of extremist beliefs, a mix of misogyny, entitlement, and even intersecting hate, with many incel communities also containing elements of white supremacy and far right ideology. And of course, the alpha male manosphere. I feel like the alpha male, like Andrew Tates of the world, are incels who are just like way louder. And it's all very, very scary because this can all escalate into a justification for crime and even mass murder. Now, from a counterterrorism perspective, incel motivated attacks present a very difficult challenge. Now, unlike organized terror groups, incels aren't receiving orders from a hierarchy. They're typically lone actors, radicalized in these online spaces. They may announce their intentions only at the last moment, as Rodger did with emailing his manifesto, or sometimes they don't tell anyone at all until they release their video online after the fact, or share their manifesto to Reddit after they've already killed people. So this makes typical law enforcement intervention really quickly because there's no call to infiltrate or obvious plot to uncover in advance. The onus, experts say, is on those early warning signs, identifying men who exhibit dangerous behavior patterns like stalking or violent fantasies or domestic abuse or explicit postings about hating women, or the comment section every time a woman posts a picture where she finds herself the least bit flattering. You will find some toxic dude who just has to insult her because he's probably an incel and there's no way she would ever want to touch him or look in his direction. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, it becomes up to us as a society to intervene before there's any escalation. But I would also advise you not to do that. I'm already worried that posting this video is going to put a target on my back, but I take fight classes now, so I have I have biceps and stuff. Now, the Secret Service report emphasized that preventing such attacks will require multidisciplinary cooperation, not just police action, but also mental health treatment, education, and community engagement to pull these vulnerable individuals away from the brink. Schools, employers, and families may need training to spot the telltale signs. For example, if you have a friend who nicknames their roommate Ted Bundy because the behavior is so creepy, that might give you a clue that something is wrong. If you have a friend who's just always rubbing women the wrong way, I mean that metaphorically, not literally, but I guess it could be literally. Speak up, say something. I think it's really hard to confront the people we care about's behavior. Sometimes we just want to kind of bow out or distance ourselves. And of course, it's not any of our responsibility to take on the fact that, oh, if I had confronted them about their behavior, maybe this terrible thing wouldn't have happened. I'm not saying that you should blame yourself, but I am saying that maybe if someone is presenting some kind of strange ideology to you one-on-one or in a small group of friends, maybe there's a way to calmly and with compassion try to understand how they're coming to that conclusion. It's like any cult, right? If someone is telling you about a group that they're in and it starts to raise red flags, the last thing you want to do is say, "You're in a cult, get out of the cult, you're crazy, whatever, whatever." They're not going to listen to you. They're going to immediately get defensive. So I'm sure if you say to someone who's an incel sharing these really problematic viewpoints, your instinct is going to want to confront. But I think if we came at it from a lens of, why do you feel that way? Why do you feel like you're not valuable enough for someone to notice you? Maybe it's not all these women, but maybe there's some grooming you could do, or we could work on your confidence, or maybe this is something you could talk to a therapist about, because I don't think there's any reason why you can't find a romantic partner. I think if we approach things like this with that type of strategy, it will go a lot longer. And I think that's what we're missing online is people are so quick to attack, especially if they see something on a loved one's post where they want to kind of, you know, like bite back or support their loved one who's getting a negative comment. They want to go on the attack. But sometimes if you want someone to just start reflecting, you have to ask questions. So saying things like, "Why do you feel that way?" Or "How did you come to that conclusion?" Or "That's a really crazy thing to like say out loud. I don't know if I would want to say that out loud. Is everything okay?" Things like that will hopefully make people start to critically think a little bit more, or at least reflect, which incels seem to desperately need. Now, in some good news, police have begun to treat incel ideology as a potential motivating factor in some cases. In the United States, incel violence has so far been prosecuted under existing murder or hate crime statutes, but federal agencies now include misogynistic extremism in their intelligence sharing. In 2025, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security even announced a new initiative to study gender based terrorism, reflecting growing concern that male supremacist violence is a strand of domestic terrorism that can no longer be ignored. And this echoes how anti feminist men's right killer Roy Den Hollander, who ambushed the family of a female federal judge in 2020, was posthumously recognized as driven by extremist misogyny. Now, I want to briefly talk about the Idaho student murders. I keep going back and forth if I want to discuss this on my channel because I've seen couple documentaries and I've been following the case, I mean, honestly, since it happened in 2022. Annie Elise has been doing really wonderful coverage on it. But and this is something I've always had a little bit of a concern about when it comes to covering true crime, just the ethics of it all. Because oftentimes when we talk about true crime, we're focusing on the murderer. And I can't imagine being a survivor or a surviving loved one going online and seeing people constantly talk about either the person that allegedly murdered your loved one or who murdered the person that you loved and you could have also been killed, or people start, accusing you of it. And in the most recent, I think it was a Prime documentary called One Night in Idaho, I feel like one of the biggest themes was they just the surviving family members and friends, they didn't want to talk about it anymore. They didn't want to talk about Bryan Kohberger. They wanted it to be done because it's just like this endless trauma loop. So I decided ultimately not to cover the case out of respect for that situation, especially since it's so fresh and, occurring right now. But it is really concerning. Why did Bryan do this to these innocent people who apparently nobody knew that they had any connection? The only conclusion people have been seemingly able to come up with is Bryan Kohberger must have been an incel. He must have been attracted to most likely Maddie, and that's why she got a target on her back because she was not interested in him. And it seems to me that he had some kind of intentionality behind this specific house on Kings Road. He knew who he wanted to target. And so, since there's more awareness of incel extremism, it kind of has influenced a lot of how the public has been interpreting this and other violent crimes, even when the evidence is inconclusive. And in the Idaho 4 case, it's so scary because there wasn't an obvious motive or connection between the suspect and the victims. So, in that void of information, internet sleuths and true crime enthusiasts started spinning theories, and one was that this was a killer targeting a sorority. And this speculation was partly fueled by curious online activity. In the weeks after the crime and before Kohberger's arrest, a user who was in a discussion group on Facebook that was devoted to the Idaho case was named Papa Rodger, and it posted inside knowledge about the murders. Some people noticed the name's resemblance, Papa Rodger, to Elliot Rodger, and have surmised that the killer himself was lurking in that group trying to drop hints. So the idea of an incel serial killer possibly referencing the incel saint Rodger caught fire in a lot of these online forums. And even after Kohberger's arrest, rumors persisted that he had been active online with that same alias. A popular TikTok and YouTube theory held was that Kohberger was this user named Papa Rodger and that he intentionally emulated Elliot Rodger's misogynistic fury. And they do feature this in the docuseries and go into a lot more detail. And now, as tantalizing as it was for some netizens, this incel theory remains unproven. There isn't an official confirmation that Kohberger posted as Papa Rodger or that incel ideology played any role at all in the Idaho murders. In fact, authorities have actually revealed very little about Kohberger's alleged motive, but nonetheless, some anecdotal evidence has encouraged more speculation. Reports have described Kohberger as a socially awkward introvert who had trouble connecting with women. One woman who went on a Tinder date with him said that he was so aggressively awkward that she faked being sick to make him leave. And in a book that was recently released about the case, a source said that Bryan would occasionally make very misogynistic remarks, and he was very well versed in incel ideology. Kohberger did pursue criminology and criminal justice academically, and at least one of his professors was an expert on serial killers. And it's plausible that he was aware of incel killers like Rodger in the course of his studies. And in fact, from an anecdotal perspective, other students that went to school with him said that he was particularly interested in Rodger. Now, when investigators did go through all of his data, his phone, his computer, they didn't mention that they found any proof that he was involved in any incel forums or had written any manifestos. And when Kohberger pleaded guilty in 2025 to avoid a trial, it also meant that many questions about his motives are going to be unanswered in court. But what's really chilling about this, since there is no motive, we can't now ask him questions and he probably won't share what his motives were. Now we're just speculating here. But two of the Idaho 4 girls were a part of the same sorority that Elliot Rodger had fantasized about killing. So you just can't help but ask the question, is Bryan Kohberger an incel? But what the Idaho case is illustrating, regardless, is the growing public consciousness of incel ideology as a potential motive for violence. I mean, the fact that so many people started screaming incel when they think about a mysterious killer who slaughtered college students, it just shows that the concept has entered the mainstream discourse on violent extremism. I mean, a decade ago, few outside certain forums had even heard the term incel. And now it's a hypothesis people raise alongside other possible motives whenever there is an act of mass violence, especially against young women. This increases awareness and it can be a double edged sword. On one hand, it helps society not overlook misogyny as a warning sign. But on the other hand, it can lead to speculative accusation. The Idaho tragedy remains a very complex, multifaceted case. And while incel driven violence is a tempting narrative, the truth of Kohberger's mindset may never be fully known. But what is clear is that the incel phenomenon has cast a long shadow, such that its specter arises even in crimes not definitively tied to it. Now, in the broader scope of extremist threats, the incel ideology represents a contemporary strain of hate that challenges traditional categories. It's not fueled by religion or ethnic nationalism, but by a crazy form of gender based resentment. Its adherents are not typically part of organized militias or networks. They're isolated individuals that are unified by a shared despair and online propaganda. Yet their actions, as seen all over the world at this point, can be just as deadly as those of more infamous movements. Going forward, tackling the incel threat requires thinking outside the box. Counter agencies are adapting some tools used against far right extremists, such as online monitoring, intelligence sharing, and community reporting of radicalization signs. But unfortunately, incels don't fit so neatly into those molds. And additionally, a lot of really young men are getting swept up into the fold. It's really horrifying that a 22-year-old boy still, honestly, would find himself so obsessed with hating women simply because he hasn't been intimate with one yet. And I wish that these young boys had other resources to look to, other better examples of what it means to be a healthy, thriving man in society. We have to remember that our gender should not separate us. We are humans at the end of the day. Some analysts do advocate treating incel radicalization as akin to a de radicalization challenge, almost like a deconstruction when you get out of a cult. But they also think it's a mental health one. Because, for example, providing better support and positive outlets for lonely young men before they spiral into hate might prevent future attacks. Schools and universities could be key intervention points since many incels are in late adolescence or early adulthood and show those red flag behaviors like fixations on rejection, expressions of misogyny, talk of going ER, etc., that peers or even counselors might notice. And at the same time, there is a push for stronger societal repudiation of the toxic ideas that incels propagate. The subculture thrives on a feedback loop of validation, the notion that it's not me, it's all women who are wrong. So, breaking that loop might require everything from better digital moderation, like incel forums being booted off of websites like Reddit, and having public awareness, maybe even campaigns about healthy masculinity and relationships. It also means not giving undue celebrity to the perpetrators. For instance, major news outlets have been criticized in the past for publishing killer manifestos in full or glamorizing their backstories, which can inadvertently lionize the attacker in the eyes of susceptible readers. A conscious effort by media to focus on the victims and context rather than the murderer's self serving narrative may help curtail the martyrdom effect incels crave. We can't give the incel perpetrator attention because that is what they want. Law enforcement, for its part, is trying to adjust its strategy. The FBI and certain local police have started to incorporate incel extremism into threat assessments and trainings. One encouraging development is the use of behavioral threat assessment teams or multi agency groups that can evaluate individuals who exhibit dangerous patterns like repeated stalking or online posts about violence, even if no crime has yet been committed. Now, in the past, a person like the yoga studio shooter might have flown under the radar aside from a few minor charges, but today his accumulation of behaviors from groping women to writing murder fantasies would trigger a higher level of scrutiny and possible intervention. In some cases, potential attacks have been averted. So, for example, in 2020, U.S. prosecutors arrested a man in Ohio who had written an incel inspired manifesto and was plotting a mass shooting of sorority members. Such cases are the example that proactive policing and tips from the community can save lives when taken seriously. And finally, there is an ideological battle to be fought. Incel ideology at its core is a form of hate, specifically a hatred of women and of society's progress towards gender equality. Like other hate movements, it feeds on fear and a sense of lost privilege. Countering it may require addressing some of the legitimate grievances that get twisted into toxic blame. Many young men today do experience loneliness, social anxiety, and disconnection. Incel forums offer them a dark refuge that validates their pain but directs them to scapegoat women rather than seek self improvement or help. Providing better mental health support, fostering social skills, and promoting empathy are long term societal projects that could undercut the allure of the incel narrative. Importantly, none of this means excusing the violent extremists. It means preventing the next troubled individual from ever becoming one. And as of mid 2025, the threat of incel violence remains palpable. This spring marked 10 years since Elliot Rodgers' rampage, a grim anniversary that saw reflection on how much or how little has changed. On incel forums, Rodger is still venerated, and new posts every day continue to denigrate women in dehumanizing terms. But also, in the past decade, we've seen the issue dragged into the light. Victims' families, researchers, and even agencies like the Secret Service have forced the conversation about misogynistic extremism. The consensus emerging is that incels pose a real social danger, a self radicalizing terror threat, unlike any traditional political terror, yet driven by absolutist ideology of its own. It's a new form of terrorism in some ways, born of the internet age's isolation and grievance, but it echoes an old misogynistic anger that society has yet to fully reckon with. The rise of incel ideology is a mirror held up to our society. And what we see reflected is not just a subculture of resentment, but a failure to reckon with loneliness. These men don't become radicalized in a vacuum. They find validation in online echo chambers, in communities that normalize hate and dehumanization, and in cultural narratives that still conflate dominance with worth. Elliot Rodger's name should not be known. And yet it is, not just because of what he did, but because others followed. His legacy, as much as I hate to use that term, lives on not only in the crimes he inspired, but in the algorithmic architectures that spread his manifesto like scripture and reward users for engaging in hate. That's the true danger. It's not just a lone man with a gun or a knife, but an ideology that festers and adapts and is spread all over the internet, whether it's something from the manosphere or on 8chan. So I just have to ask, what do you think about this topic? I find it so deeply disturbing and scary, and it makes me feel a little bit helpless because I think when we hear such extreme points of views being expressed by people, our first instinct is to run, distance, stay away from them. And I think with people like incels, it's so hard to be like, so this person could potentially become violent. So I need to embrace them and help them and support them and nurture their loneliness. It's like this, it's like you can't have both in your head a little bit. Um, so it's really hard, I think, to hear, well, we need to be compassionate and help them and get them to feel loved and appreciated. It just feels like so much like mental labor being put on someone who could potentially be a victim to the very ideology that we're trying to discourage someone from adopting. So I guess what would you do? Have you been in a situation where you had to have a tough love conversation with someone who had particularly damning ideology or thought processes? I feel like we all know someone in our lives that has some type of like crazy belief or opinion, and you're like, we just don't talk about that. We just don't talk about it. But this is something you would have to gently confront head on, and not only do that, but do it with compassion and support. It feels so counterintuitive to do that. So it's just like a fascinating, difficult, interesting thing to consider. So I'm so curious if you have any stories about anyone you know who's an incel or has some type of like radical perspective that has kind of taken over their life, and what you did to help negate that. Did you distance yourself from them or did you try to support them? And it's like sometimes there's only so much support you can offer before you have to get a toxic person out of your life. It's a tricky, tricky situation, but it's also really scary because this hate is driving mass harm. So, anyways, please let me know your thoughts down below. I'm trying to like find a way to like make the end of the video more positive because this just feels really, we're in a dark place. We're in a dark place now. But if you want to support our teacher, you can find her wish list down in that pinned comment down below. And thank you so, so much for supporting the channel. I really appreciate you, and I hope you have a great and safe rest of your day. Remember to always ask questions and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon.